wraps up GNN's international news. We turn now to Retrospective, GNN's weekly feature segment where we go back in time and recount a significant occurrence on the anniversary of that event. Today, we take you back to the year 2003, the agro-terrorism attack of foot and mouth disease that hit the United States. Jim Stone, our retrospective moderator, revisits the facts of the outbreak and its after effects with two experts closely involved with the agro-terrorism event.
Thank you, Doris. Retrospective will indeed focus on the agro-terrorism attack of foot and mouth disease, or FMD, that the United States went through in 2003 for two very significant reasons. It's important to understand both its effects and the status of U.S. agricultural preparedness today. Joining us on Retrospective is Charles Murray, a well-known expert in bio and agro-terrorism at the American Institute in Washington, and Robert Reed, the former Undersecretary of Marketing and Regulatory Programs with the USDA. Mr. Reed had oversight of the USDA's actions in the FMD outbreak of 2003. We'll begin our retrospective with Mr. Murray. Recount for us, if you will, the agro-terrorism attack of April 2003, as well as its consequences.
Of course, Jim. As you might recall, the attack involved the deliberate introduction of FMD in 5 states that spread rapidly to 44 states. If we could go to the slides I brought along. Before the outbreak was eradicated or wiped out, over 48 million cattle, swine, sheep, deer, and other wildlife had been destroyed. It took over a year before the end of infection and another 6 months before America was considered FMD-free and could resume exports of affected meats and other byproducts. The cost to the U.S. economy amounted to over $30 billion directly to the affected livestock industries and agricultural exports, and by some estimates, billions of dollars in indirect costs to industries and communities dependent upon that agricultural sector for their economic well-being.
So, in addition to the damage done to the affected industry and its economic effects, and of course not to minimize those numbers in both livestock losses and dollars, what other outcomes were there?
Well, as one might expect, in a bipartisan move, Congress called for an independent panel to investigate the attacks and the government's role in managing the crisis and its end results. The Warren Lee Commission was highly critical of the administration's preparedness for and the response to the attack. Now, what it found was that the federal government was ill-prepared for a national foreign animal disease emergency.
I must also say that while I feel the nation is less vulnerable to an agro-terrorism attack today than in 2003, the insidious nature of agro-terrorism attacks, using highly contagious diseases, makes them particularly difficult to deter or defend against.
Point well taken.
There was confusion as to what agency or agencies had the lead in managing the crisis. It took as long as 2 days to obtain a presumptive positive diagnosis of FMD in some states. And once that diagnosis was obtained, federal officials were slow in making preventative measures to halt the spread of the disease. A stop movement order initially was put into place in just 5 states, when in fact infected animals had already been transported to over a dozen states. From the outset, we were behind the disease instead of containing it. There was also confusion regarding the extent of the stop movement restrictions, what was being stopped and for how long. Again, faced with an outbreak of a highly contagious disease with major economic repercussions, there was unnecessary delay in the federal mobilization.
However, we now have advanced procedures and plans for such occurrences.
We will hear more about those strategies, Mr. Reed, but now, Mr. Murray, continue with your point, please.
Finally, as the interagency deliberated and the White House was feeling pressure from Congress, the President took it upon himself to invoke the Stafford Act and provide federal assistance and funding to states struggling to manage the outbreak.
Now, with the presidential declaration and federal mobilization, did those actions effectively contain the disease and lead to its eradication?
You know, I wish I could say with certainty that it did. Unfortunately, that was not the case. There was considerable concern over the strategy to control the disease. In addition, there was much angst over the euthanasia policy and the potential to needlessly put down healthy animals. While a limited amount of the proper vaccines were available, a surge production capacity was insufficient or simply non-existent. And vaccinating animals also has its own economic side effects.
Well, now we have some rather graphic file tape, I understand, of the animals being disposed of. Take a look at the monitor.
Yeah, as you can see, the proper disposal of millions of animal carcasses became a huge issue as mounds of carcasses accumulated awaiting burning, burial, and rendering. There were public demonstrations in Washington and throughout the nation, protesting issues ranging from a perceived lack of government response to the noxious consequences of mounting and destroying carcasses to the inhumane treatment of animals.
What was the political fallout from all of this?
I suppose the good news is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was not abolished, as the British Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food was subsumed into the UK's Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the aftermath of the country's FMD outbreak in 2001. Let me emphasize that while the Congress and the American people were very upset over the 2003 FMD outbreak and its many effects, there were mitigating circumstances which quite possibly saved USDA and enabled the president's re-election in the following year. First, some were quick to point out that this was a very aggressive agro-terrorism attack, unlike the natural occurrence of FMD in the UK. And secondly, and perhaps more important, was the president's and his administration's effective handling of the Iraq crisis that year. I'm not sure a president or an administration could fare that well should an FMD attack occur again with similar results.
Well, and as you know, while circumstantial evidence points to al-Qaeda operatives as the perpetrators, no individuals have been apprehended in connection with those attacks. Mr. Reed, you had direct oversight of the USDA's actions after the FMD outbreak in 2003. What has changed since then? Is the country still vulnerable to such an attack, particularly in light of the high sense of threat which exists today?
Well, Jim, I must point out that we learned much from that horrific attack on the nation's economy and agricultural infrastructure. And much has been done to rectify the problems which were sustained as a result of those agro-terrorism attacks and the massive outbreak of FMD.
What then has changed?
Well, first and foremost, the Department of Agriculture and its Homeland Security partners in the federal government, the states and industry, now have plans for such occurrences. They train to those plans and exercise them regularly. Now, as you might recall, the administration was just in the process of standing up the Department of Homeland Security and the Terrorist Threat Integration Center, or TTIC, at the time of these attacks. Now, these organizations are now fully operational, and I'm pleased to report that USDA's Office of Inspector General and other department intelligence functionaries have close ties with DHS and TTIC. Also, in contrast to 2003, USDA employees now undergo security screenings, and those with the need to know are cleared to receive these intelligence products. In the field, our Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service has an aggressive education program to certify more foreign animal disease diagnosticians and to train local veterinarians and animal technicians to quickly recognize the symptoms of and properly test for such diseases.
Well, you've mentioned a number of organizational and administrative changes. Well, has science or technology offered any advancements in managing such an outbreak?
Absolutely. Both the department's Agricultural Research Service and the science and technology communities have made advances. Today, through the collaborative efforts of the Department of Homeland Security and USDA, there are aerosol pathogen detection systems, or sniffer machines, in place in concentrated animal population nodes, which can sample and detect the presence of various pathogens. There is also a program underway to conduct PCR sampling of shipments of milk from dairies for the presence of these highly infectious agents. The department has developed rapid detection field tests that enable veterinarians and animal health technicians in the field to quickly identify, to a presumptive positive level, the existence of the disease without having to transport specimens to one of the federal labs. Now, this cuts down on the overall reaction time. It improves the chances of controlling the disease. Also, related to controlling the spread of the disease, much of the American livestock industry now has computerized chips attached to primarily dairy and meat cattle to enable better tracing of animal transportation movements. And there have been significant developments in the production of vaccines that allow for treatment against multiple serotypes and increased manufacturer capacity of necessary dosages to allow more options for a control strategy.
And now I would like to point out that while all of what Mr. Reed says is true, many of these programs are not fully fielded due to the lack of funding. And due to that fact, many of the means of detection are, frankly, hit or miss.
Well, I suppose it would be better if we don't have to put these improvements to the test.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, that's all the time we have for Retrospective today. Thank you, Charles Murray, a well-known industry expert in bio and agroterrorism at the American Institute in Washington, and Robert Reed, former Undersecretary of Marketing and Regulatory Programs with the USDA. And you've been watching Retrospective. I'm Jim Stone. Back to you, Doris.
Thank you, Jim. Recapping today's lead story, the federal government has raised the national threat level from yellow, which is an elevated condition, to orange, which is a high condition, after American intelligence obtained evidence that agents of al-Qaeda might be positioning themselves to carry out multiple major attacks. Some U.S. intelligence officials said that it was not clear from fragmentary evidence they'd obtained whether the activity among the al-Qaeda operatives involved preliminary work like surveillance of possible targets and logistical support for cells involved in coming plots, or was instead evidence of more advanced work on imminent attacks. An official added that intercepts of telephone conversations, email messages, and other intelligence indicating that terrorists had moved closer to an attack is one of the crucial considerations used by the Homeland Security Department to determine when the threat level should be raised. But officials said, and I'm quoting here, "The evidence is not detailed enough to point to specific targets, the individual operatives suspected of participating in the new plots, to the exact timing of the potential attacks, or even the methods or weapons to be used. It is still unclear whether the plots involve conventional weapons or weapons of mass destruction, such as chemical, biological, or radiological devices." And that does it for this edition of GNN. Good night.
Now, the nation's #1 newscast. This is Global News Network.
Foot and mouth disease is breaking out across the nation. I'm Doris McMillan, and that's our lead story at this hour on GNN. Sources at the Department of Agriculture confirm that cases of sick hogs in North Carolina, beef cattle in Kansas and Texas, and dairy cows in Wisconsin have tested positive for foot and mouth disease, or FMD. State animal health officials in North Carolina and Kansas are reporting that field diagnostic tests have given presumptive positive indications for foot and mouth disease in 2 different livestock operations. In North Carolina, sick animals at a corporate hog farm have caused that operation to be quarantined, and state police and local law enforcement officials are implementing road closures and traffic control around that area. Now, you might recall the major agroterrorism outbreak of foot and mouth disease, which occurred in the United States in 2003. But again, just what is FMD? For the answer, we turn to GNN's agriculture expert, Dr. Robert Turner. Dr. Turner, explain just what exactly is foot and mouth disease.
Certainly. Foot and mouth disease is a severe and highly contagious viral disease. It affects cattle, swine, sheep, goats, deer, and other animals with split hooves. The main symptoms are fever and blisters around the mouth and on the animal's feet. When the blisters pop, they leave erosions in the tongue and lips and in the mouth and between the hooves. Often the animals refuse to move because of the pain in their feet or refuse to eat because of their painful mouth blisters. Meat animals don't usually regain lost weight for months. Even if they recover, cows don't usually produce milk at their former rates. FMD can also lead to inflammation of the muscular wall of the heart and can cause death, especially in newborns.
Are humans susceptible to foot and mouth disease?
The U.S. Department of Agriculture does not consider FMD a zoonotic disease that is communicable to humans. Having said that, the Centers for Disease Control suggests that FMD infections in humans are extremely rare.
Well, Dr. Turner, if this proves to be FMD, how difficult is it to control?
FMD is one of the most difficult animal infections to control. Livestock animals in this country are highly susceptible to FMD viruses. This disease poses a considerable threat to our country's economy because it's extremely contagious. Animals, people, or materials that bring the virus into contact with susceptible animals can spread the virus. This can happen even unintentionally when people wear contaminated clothing or shoes around the animals, when contaminated facilities or vehicles are used, or when raw or undercooked garbage containing infected meat is fed to susceptible animals. Once one animal is exposed to the virus, the disease will spread to most of the herd by direct contact, including through the air. Disease can spread rapidly through routine livestock movements unless it is detected early and eradicated immediately.
And what would happen if this outbreak became a major epidemic?
If FMD were to spread unchecked, the economic impact could reach tens of billions of dollars in the first year alone. Deer and wildlife populations could become infected and be a source of reinfection of livestock. This would lengthen the duration of the outbreak and inflate the cost substantially.
Well, if FMD is detected, what should be done?
Okay. I would say that the most important thing to do is to put in place a strict movement control. The only way you can hope to get in front of the disease is if you don't have dozens of new cases popping up every day. In the UK outbreak of 2001 and even in the United States in 2003, there were violations of movement restrictions, which meant continued spread even after the restrictions were in place. U.S. authorities need not only to announce the stop movement, but also to enforce the stop movement to ensure that no infected animals get out.
Dr. Turner, thank you so much for being with us. I understand that we have GNN's Andy Field standing by live in Colby, Kansas, with the latest developments there. Andy?
Thank you, Doris. We are standing along Interstate 70. It's the main highway between Denver and Kansas City, a critical artery for commerce here in the Midwest. Now, a few miles east of here is the farm where they found an infected herd, a herd infected with foot and mouth disease. As a result, the governor has declared a state of emergency in Kansas. And now that means that they have closed the state borders to all movements of livestock. GNN has asked Jane Bradford of the Kansas Animal Health Department to help us understand the situation. Jane, what's the latest?
Well, Andy, not only are the interstate highways closed at the borders for movement of livestock and agricultural equipment, but also U.S. and state highways and secondary roads crossing into neighboring states are restricted. We also have a 6-mile quarantine zone established around the infected farm, which now entails 44 blocked roads.
This has got to be a tremendous drain on your resources. How is your department handling this?
Let me say right off the top, this is a massive joint undertaking. The Kansas Animal Health Department is working closely with law enforcement, the local police department, sheriff's office, and the Kansas Highway Patrol to maintain the quarantine and border closings. In addition, KAHD is working side by side with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and state and local animal health and emergency management agencies to contain the outbreak and manage the situation. We literally have thousands of personnel at work, including the Kansas State National Guard.
So how effective have you been in actually containing this outbreak?
Largely effective. Let me point out that while most citizens and livestock producers are cooperating with the quarantine and road closures, there are a few livestock owners taking matters into their own hands. We have reports that some individuals are trying to move their animals out of the area and to market before their herds could be identified for eradication.
So you're saying that the herds will have to be eradicated, destroyed?
That is the protocol for infected herds. We know we have one infected herd. There could be others. It's too early to tell.
All right, Jane Bradford of the Kansas Animal Health Department, thank you very much. Certainly a worrisome situation, to say the least. Back to you, Doris.
Andy, thank you for that report from Colby, Kansas. In business news, reports of the foot and mouth disease outbreak have rattled commodity markets and food company shares. Cattle futures in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange have dropped to reach the daily trading limit of 1.5 cents per pound, with trading currently stopped at 74.5 cents per pound. The Business Conduct Committee will meet this afternoon to decide what, if any, steps need to be taken to head off a market disaster. Options range from confining trading to a fixed range to terminating trading altogether. Prices for corn, the main cattle feed, have also dropped sharply, with next month's corn at the Chicago Board of Trade down already 6 cents per bushel at $2.07 a bushel. Major meat companies are also taking a hit on Wall Street. Shares of poultry and beef processing giant Tyson Foods are down 49 cents, which is 4% on the New York Stock Exchange. Smithfield Foods is down 39 cents to $24.45. ConAgra Foods, which owns a fresh beef and pork operation, is down 72 cents or 3% to $22.12. McDonald's Corporation is down 90 cents or 3.2% at $27.45. Outback Steakhouse is down $1.06 or 3.1% at $33.08. Hamburger chain operator Wendy's International is down 14 cents at $31.48 from a 52-week high at opening. That's all for now in business. GNN will, of course, stay on top of this rapidly developing story, the outbreak of foot and mouth disease across our country. Could this be an agro-terrorism attack? As we learn new information, we'll report it here live. I'm Doris McMillan. Good day.
Now, the nation's #1 newscast. This is Global News Network.
In an apparent agro-terrorism attack reminiscent of the 2003 outbreak, foot and mouth disease has spread across the United States. I'm Doris McMillan. Sources at the United States Department of Agriculture have reported 24 states, ranging from Vermont to California, all reporting confirmed or presumptive positive cases of FMD, and that number is expected to grow. For more on the outbreak, we go to GNN's agricultural expert, Dr. Robert Turner. Dr. Turner, what can you tell us about all this?
Doris, the Department of Agriculture reports to date that FMD is now present in 24 states with 32 herds and over 3,000 animals infected. Now, of course, the key task is how to control the spread of the disease and to take the appropriate action that will lead to its eradication.
Dr. Turner, can you lay it out for us?
Well, to begin, federal and state stop movements presently in place are essential elements of any control strategy. The USDA tracing of recent animal transportation movements is ongoing. This, of course, helps further chart livestock activity and will help provide key information to officials as they determine what herds have been exposed to the disease, along with the surveillance of other herds.
There are other national control strategies to be considered according to some official sources. Isn't that true, Dr. Turner?
Yes, Doris, serious thought has to be given to other elements of the national control strategy. Here are the issues. Should all animals infected and exposed be slaughtered? Should high-risk animals be preemptively slaughtered? Should susceptible animals be vaccinated, either to allow them to live out their normal economic lives or to slow the spread of the disease until the animals can be slaughtered and their carcasses disposed of? Or should we allow FMD to become endemic to American agriculture? All these choices have economic and social implications, and these decisions have to be made now. Doris, that's where we are for the moment.
A very critical decision point here in this crisis. As always, thank you, Dr. Turner. We turn now to Atwood, Kansas, where GNN's Andy Field is standing by live with a highly concerned rancher. Andy?
Doris, in order for stop movements and other elements of a disease control strategy to be effective, the operators, the ranchers, need economic assurances that their losses will be covered. Otherwise, they might feel compelled to take actions to circumvent stop movements and other measures and then further spread the disease. Now, we've hooked up with Roy Saunders. He's a very concerned cattle rancher. He's taking care of some business here at the bank. Tell me, Mr. Saunders, what's on your mind?
Well, Andy, I operate a ranch with 30,000 head of beef cattle. While my cattle are healthy, I'm not sure at this stage what the government is going to do about my herd. Vaccinate it or slaughter it. Or if the herd remains healthy, just leave it alone. Meanwhile, in order to operate my ranch, I'm heavily indebted to the bank. And the banker is speculating on what will become of his investment. Should the bank speculate that the value of my herd and his equity might decline and call in my loans, I'll be financially ruined, with a mortgage to pay and a family to feed. That's why you see ranchers breaking stop movement. They're trying to get their animals to market and cut potential losses.
Well, Mr. Saunders, to hear you say it, it sounds like you're in quite a predicament. What should be done?
The government needs to decide what kind of control strategy it will implement. And of equal importance, it needs to put into place a fair and equitable indemnification process. Otherwise, there will be havoc out here.
Well, Mr. Saunders, thanks for taking time to talk to us here. And Doris, you heard it, indemnification or havoc. Back to you.
Thank you, Andy. We are just a few days into this outbreak, and we're already seeing the economic effects. Earlier, GNN spoke with Benjamin Klein, a macroeconomist with the Department of Commerce.
Over the past 2 days, the markets have reacted dramatically to the foot and mouth disease epidemic. The Dow Jones, S&P 500, and NASDAQ indices are each down nearly 6 percentage points so far this week. In reaction, commodities on the Chicago Board of Trade and Mercantile Exchange and livestock market have halted. This agricultural emergency threatens many broad sectors of the U.S. economy. The agricultural industry represents 13% of the U.S. gross domestic product. Agriculture employs 17% of the workforce. Not only are livestock operations affected, but also feed suppliers, transporters, meat processing plants, just to name a few. That will have a trickle-down effect to other businesses, particularly in the Midwest, where they have significant agricultural sectors, such as Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa. Related issues are indemnity and compensation. As herds are destroyed to control the spread of the disease, those producers who lose their animals are entitled to indemnification. When we are considering a susceptible animal population of over 150 million head, those costs could easily approach $1 billion. And then there's the issue of compensation for second, third, and fourth-tier parties affected by the outbreak. Just controlling the spread of the disease could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. If the disease becomes established, it would shrink the nation's $11.5 billion export market for animals, meats, milk, and other animal products. FMD-free companies will simply stop trading with the U.S. Then, as producers try to recoup losses from their overseas markets, food prices at the supermarkets will rise and for the American consumers. Just an example of the impact on our overseas markets. Last year, the U.S. exported nearly $4 billion worth of beef. With foot and mouth disease, our exports of beef would be halted for at least 1 year. According to agriculture specialists within the Department of Commerce and USDA, whom I've spoken to, if we don't successfully wipe out this FMD outbreak and the disease spreads throughout the country, the costs over several years' time could run $30 billion. And by some account, that's a conservative estimate. Make no mistake, the effect of this outbreak will be felt in the wallets and purses of every American.
That was Benjamin Klein, macroeconomist with the Department of Commerce, in our studios about an hour ago. As various states respond to the FMD outbreak, state and local agencies are exhausting their resources. The governors of North Carolina, Texas, Kansas, and Iowa have thus far declared emergencies and have requested a presidential emergency declaration for their states. We will continue to keep you updated on the FMD agro-terrorism attack on the United States. Stay tuned to GNN.
Now, the nation's #1 newscast. This is Global News Network.
The effects of the agro-terrorism outbreak of foot and mouth disease continues to be felt across America. In the latest report from the Department of Agriculture, FMD has been confirmed in 40 states. Thus far, over 20,000 herds and 2 million animals have been infected or exposed to the disease. The eradication of infected and exposed animals is well underway, with over 4,000 head already destroyed, with an additional 1.2 million awaiting a similar fate. For more on the disease, we go to GNN reporter Andy Field. Andy, you've been following this story closely. Where are we at this stage?
Well, Doris, surveillance and identifying herds with foot and mouth disease continues, and the transportation of live animals has virtually ceased. Now the euthanasia and disposal of infected and exposed animals is underway, and given the magnitude of the infections and exposures, tens of thousands of animals at some sites, livestock operators are relying on the most efficient means of putting the animals down, primarily gunshots to the head that cause instant death. Now the task then turns to the disposal of carcasses. Some of the common methods include rendering, burial, incineration, and composting. Now, they prefer rendering in order to salvage some carcass remnants. However, there is a very limited throughput, and the sheer amount of animals destroyed quickly overwhelms rendering capacity. Burial then becomes the preferred method, but that isn't easy either. For instance, a herd of 30,000 cattle carcasses would require a 31-foot deep pit the size of a football field. In other words, it will require a trench over 15 miles long, 10 feet wide, and 9 feet deep. Now, when the United Kingdom and the U.S. faced a similar crisis in 2001 and 2003, they built some enormous funeral pyres to burn thousands of cattle, swine, and sheep. That required a lot of fuel and left tons of carcass ash. In addition, health officials and environmentalists are now worried that the fuel and open-air carcass fires could release carcinogens into the air. Any way you look at it, carcass disposal will be a massive logistical effort. That's where we are now. For GNN, I'm Andy Field.
Controversies and conflicts associated with the FMD crisis are occurring across the nation. With the halt on transportation, foods are not getting to markets. That factor alone, with some who fear a contaminated food supply, has led to hoarding and long lines at the supermarkets as people rush to get their preferred products while they last. The fast food industry is virtually boycotted. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and other outlets report a 70% drop in business. The animal rights organization People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, and other similar groups are mounting protest in Washington and numerous state capitals, and they threaten action against the destruction of animals. And laid-off food processing plant, tanneries, and other employees are on the march. They're calling for federal and state compensation packages. In Washington, voter constituents are making their voices heard, and groups representing numerous agriculture-related industries are lobbying members of Congress, particularly from farm states. They're demanding that the federal government take action. Now, on the international scene, major overseas trading partners have denied U.S. ships berthing in their ports. It appears that foreign flag carriers are diverting their ships away from U.S. ports. GNN will continue to follow these stories, and we'll keep you up to date as more information becomes available. You've been watching GNN. I'm Doris McMillan.